The Grand City Hall was buzzing quietly as staff made the final arrangements for the evening. It was the kind of night that people remembered for a long time: bright chandeliers, polished floors, and walls filled with portraits of people who had mattered in the city for generations. Guests arrived in elegant dresses and tailored suits, each carrying a glass of sparkling champagne. Soft laughter and polite chatter filled the air. Somewhere in the middle of this elegance, a young boy watched from behind a doorway, standing quietly beside his mother, who was busy arranging flowers and tidying the room. He was a small boy, not much taller than the table beside him, with eyes that seemed too big for his face. His hands were rough from chores, but there was a quiet patience about him that no one could mistake. The organizers were running late with their schedule. The famous pianist, known for both his brilliance and his arrogance, had just arrived. He moved with an air of certainty, as if the room existed only to witness him. Guests whispered his name with admiration, some with envy. He smiled, a faint smirk, greeting those who tried to flatter him, brushing off others with a flick of his hand. Meanwhile, the young boy's mother kept moving, dusting and adjusting chairs, making sure everything was perfect. She didn't speak much, but there was a kind of pride in the way she kept working, even when she felt invisible in the crowd. Earlier that week, the organizers had invited the pianist to perform at the charity event. It was supposed to be a night of beautiful music and inspiration. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The guest who was supposed to perform first had canceled at the last minute. People were murmuring about what to do, unsure how to fill the gap. One of the organizers, trying to lighten the mood, mentioned the young boy who had been helping his mother in the hall. "Maybe he can try?" they said half-jokingly. Laughter echoed through the room. The pianist's smirk grew wider. Everyone assumed it was a joke, just a whimsical idea to amuse the crowd while they waited. No one really thought the boy would be asked to play. But sometimes opportunities appear where you least expect them. The boy had grown up surrounded by music without ever being formally trained. His mother often played old piano recordings while cleaning, and he would hum along, tapping on tables or the piano at the small community center whenever he got a chance. Music had always been a comfort, a way to escape from a world that didn't seem to notice him. Tonight, standing behind the grand doors, he felt something stir, a mixture of fear and excitement. He didn't know what would happen if he were asked, but he knew he couldn't ignore the chance. The pianist continued his rehearsal, fingers dancing over the keys, producing notes that floated through the hall like silk. Every sound he made drew eyes, admiration, and a little envy. The boy watched quietly, imagining himself sitting at that piano, his fingers producing music that could touch hearts. He had never been allowed to sit at such a grand piano before. His experiences were limited, his world small, but in his mind, the music was vast, infinite. He had spent hours practicing alone, learning to listen closely, to find the emotions behind every note. He knew that tonight, if he got the chance, he had to give everything he had. Meanwhile, the crowd had begun to settle, chatting politely and moving toward their seats. Conversations swirled around power, money, and influence, but the boy barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the music, on the pianist, on what it would feel like to finally express everything he had held inside. His mother gave him a small, encouraging nod, one that carried more meaning than any words could. She didn't need to speak. She had taught him the language of quiet support, the importance of courage, and the value of persistence. The organizers, seeing the boy standing there so quietly, exchanged glances. Perhaps the joke could be real. Perhaps the boy could play. One of them called out softly, "Would you like to try?" The words hung in the air. The pianist, hearing this, leaned back with a smirk, clearly expecting amusement. He thought this would be entertaining, a chance to laugh at someone who had no place in this world of elegance. But the boy didn't hesitate. He nodded, walking slowly toward the piano. Every step felt heavy and light at the same time, weighted with fear but lifted by hope. Guests turned, curious at the sudden movement, unsure what was about to unfold. The boy reached the piano and looked at it, a magnificent instrument polished to perfection. He could feel the smooth wood under his hands as he lifted the lid. The room seemed to grow quieter. The pianist watched, still smirking, confident that the boy would falter. The audience leaned in, some with curiosity, others with amusement. But the boy didn't see any of it. His mind focused on the first note, the memory of every silent practice, every night spent tapping on tables, every moment he had dreamed of this. His fingers hovered, and then slowly he pressed the first key. It was soft, almost tentative, but there was a clarity to it, a sound that seemed to carry more than just a note. It carried his story, his struggles, and his hope. The pianist's smirk faltered slightly. The audience leaned closer, surprised at the unexpected depth. The boy's confidence grew with every note, every chord, until the music began to flow naturally. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about expressing what he had always felt. His mother watched from behind, holding back tears, proud beyond words. In that moment, the boy was no longer invisible, no longer just the maid's son. He was a musician, a storyteller, and the music spoke louder than any doubt. The pianist stopped playing and simply watched, now intrigued rather than amused. The room had shifted, the mood transformed. Conversations faded, replaced by the quiet awe of people witnessing something genuine. The boy continued, unaware of the impact he was making. Each note carried emotion, history, and a truth that no one could ignore. The smirk on the pianist's face was gone, replaced by concentration. He realized that talent and heart can appear in the most unexpected places. And so the night continued, not as a display of power or prestige, but as a reminder that sometimes the quietest voices can speak the loudest, and the most unassuming individuals can change the way everyone around them sees the world. This was only the beginning, a small step that would mark the start of something far greater than anyone in that hall could have imagined. The boy left the grand hall that night, carrying more than just the sound of applause in his ears. He carried a spark, a sense that something in his life had shifted forever. The city streets were quiet now, the echo of laughter and music fading into the night. He walked beside his mother, who had been finishing her duties, her hands still slightly dusty from flowers and polishing cloths. She didn't speak much, but her smile was enough. It said without words that she believed in him, always had, and always would. Back home, their small apartments seemed smaller than ever, but the warmth of familiarity wrapped around them. The boy sat at a rickety wooden table, tracing the grain. With his fingers, thinking about the grand piano, the music, and the faces of the people who had watched him. He felt a mix of fear and hope, an uncertainty he had carried all his life now, mingling with the taste of possibility. He remembered the smirk of the famous pianist and the hush of the audience, and it all felt unreal. Yet every note he had played had been real, and that reality gave him courage. Life in the apartment was modest but filled with quiet routines. The mother cooked, cleaned, and cared for her son in ways that were steady and tireless. She never demanded perfection from him, but she encouraged him to find what made his heart sing. The boy often practiced in the small living room, using an old keyboard they had borrowed from a neighbor, or simply tapping on the tabletop to create rhythm and melody. Tonight he played softly, letting his mind replay the music from the hall, imagining himself back on that stage, letting each note rise and fall as it had before. His fingers moved almost instinctively, guided by the memory of every practice. Every secret hour spent learning the language of music. The next few days were quiet yet transformative. The boy's story had not yet reached the wider world, but the event had stirred something inside him. He felt an urgency to practice, to prepare, to be ready for any opportunity that might come again. His mother noticed the determination in his eyes and gently reminded him to rest, to eat, to care for himself, but she never tried to control the fire she saw burning. She knew it was rare, this kind of passion that could not be taught or forced, only nurtured. In the community center, he found a small piano tucked in the corner. It was old and slightly out of tune, but it was better than nothing. He sat there for hours, exploring scales and experimenting with chords. Music, which had once been a secret comfort, became a world he could step into completely. Each note felt like a conversation, each melody like a story told without words. He imagined the grand hall, the audience, and even the smirk of the famous pianist, using it all as fuel to deepen his understanding and expression. The boy began to notice the way music affected others. When he played for neighbors or for the children in the community center, people stopped and listened. Some were moved to tears, others simply smiled in quiet appreciation. He realized that music was more than notes on a page. It was connection, a bridge between hearts. The realization gave him a sense of purpose. He wanted to share, to touch people, to make them feel what he felt when he played. School life was different. The boy returned to his classes carrying a confidence he had never known. He still blended into the background in some ways, but there was a quiet glow about him, a subtle authority that came from knowing one's own talent. Classmates who had ignored or underestimated him began to notice, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with admiration. Teachers observed his focus and the way he approached challenges with patience and precision. The boy learned that skill alone was not enough. He needed resilience, humility, and patience. Music was his teacher in more ways than one. At home, the mother and son developed new routines. She would set aside time for him to practice without interruption, bringing him tea or snacks quietly when he played for hours. They laughed sometimes, sharing small jokes about rhythm and clumsy notes. They cried sometimes, not out of sadness, but from the intensity of emotion that music brought into their lives. Their bond deepened, strengthened by shared dreams and the quiet understanding that neither of them had ever needed anyone else's validation to know their worth. One afternoon, as the boy practiced a new composition he had been experimenting with, he noticed a small advertisement in the local newspaper for a youth music competition. It was not a grand event, but it was an opportunity to perform in front of a new audience. To see where his skills truly stood, the boy hesitated. Doubt crept in, the old fear of failing or being laughed at. But then he remembered the grand hall, the smirk, the hush, and the applause. He remembered the feeling of being alive in the music. He looked at his mother, who nodded silently, eyes shining with pride. That was enough. He decided he would enter the competition. The days leading up to the event were filled with preparation. The boy practiced tirelessly, experimenting with new melodies, perfecting the pieces he already knew. He paid attention to every detail, from finger placement to expression, from tempo to emotion. Music became a dialogue between him and the world, a language he was mastering one note at a time. His mother watched, silently supportive, ensuring he had food, rest, and encouragement, never pushing, never interfering, simply being there. The boy's dedication began to show results. His confidence grew, his playing became more nuanced, and his emotional connection to the music deepened. He learned to anticipate the flow of a piece, to express stories through melody, and to convey emotions without speaking a single word. Music was no longer just a passion. It was becoming a part of who he was, inseparable from his identity. A companion and guide through life's complexities. The night before the competition, the boy stayed up late, practicing under the soft glow of a small lamp. He felt nervous, but not paralyzed by fear. He understood now that mistakes were part of the journey, that perfection was not the goal. But expression, connection, and honesty were. He played slowly, deliberately, savoring each note, feeling the music flow through him as if it had always been waiting for this moment. His mother sat quietly nearby, listening. Feeling the swell of pride and love that had accompanied every step of his journey, the boy slept fitfully that night. Dreams filled with music, applause, and the faces of those who had inspired and challenged him. Morning came with the quiet hum of the city outside their window. He awoke with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to take the next step. To face the world and show not just skill, but heart, courage, and the power of perseverance. The journey that had begun with a single note in a grand hall was far from over. But the boy understood that he had already begun to transform not just his own life, but the lives of those who listened to the music he carried within him. The day of the youth music competition arrived with a soft golden morning light. The city seemed to hum with possibility, though the boy and his mother barely noticed it. Their focus was on the simple preparations of the day, the quiet routines that had carried them this far. The mother packed a small bag with snacks and water, careful to include the boy's favorite tea, which always helped him calm his nerves. She did not speak of winning or losing. She only reminded him to breathe, to play as he had always played, and to let the music speak. The boy nodded, taking in her words as if they were an invisible shield against the anxiety that sometimes crept in. At the competition hall, the energy was different from the grand hall he had played in before. It was smaller, more intimate, but no less important to those who were gathered. Young musicians from all corners of the city had come, each carrying their own hopes, fears, and stories. The boy watched quietly, feeling the familiar mix of excitement and trepidation. He noticed the other competitors adjusting their instruments, tuning pianos, rehearsing silently. There was an unspoken tension in the air, a shared understanding that this was more than just a performance. It was an opportunity to be seen, to be heard. When his turn approached, the boy felt a flutter in his chest, a mix of nerves and anticipation. He remembered the grand hall, the smirk of the famous pianist, the hush of the audience, and the applause. That memory became a quiet anchor, reminding him that he had faced challenges before and had risen above them. He walked toward the piano, each step deliberate, each breath steady. The audience turned to watch, curious about this quiet boy who seemed to carry a world of music within him as he sat at the piano. The keys cool beneath his fingers, he closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of the countless hours he had practiced in his small apartment, of the rhythm of tapping on tables and the melodies he had imagined in his mind. He thought of his mother, who had supported him in silence, who had believed in him without needing applause. And he thought of the music itself, the language that had always allowed him to speak when words failed. He pressed the first key, and the hall fell into a quiet that was almost tangible. The boy's fingers moved gracefully over the keys, producing notes that seemed to rise and fall like waves. There was a subtle power in the music, a depth of feeling that surprised even those who had come expecting ordinary performances. Each note carried emotion, a story woven through years of quiet perseverance and secret practice. The audience listened, spellbound by the sincerity and passion that radiated from the small figure at the piano. The boy was no longer just a competitor. He was a storyteller, and the piano was his voice. The judges, experienced musicians themselves, leaned forward, their expressions betraying surprise and admiration. They had expected skill, but what they were witnessing was something beyond technique. There was heart, soul, and truth in every chord, a reflection of a life shaped by struggle and nurtured by love. The boy felt the music flowing through him, not as a performance to impress, but as a natural expression of who he was. The hall seemed to disappear, leaving only him, the piano, the notes that carried his story as the piece reached its climax. The boy's emotions became intertwined with the music. He played with a freedom he had never known, letting go of fear and doubt. Every note was deliberate, yet spontaneous, a delicate balance between control and release. The audience could feel it, a shared pulse of emotion that connected them to the boy's journey. When the final note lingered in the air, there was a moment of profound silence, as if everyone was collectively holding their breath, reluctant to break the magic that had been created. Then the applause began, soft at first, then swelling into a wave of genuine admiration. The boy opened his eyes, surprised at the intensity of the response. Faces in the audience shone with appreciation, some smiling, some teary-eyed. The judges nodded, whispering to one another, clearly impressed by the depth of the performance. The boy's mother, standing in the back, let out a quiet, relieved breath, tears glistening in her eyes. She had always known he was talented, but seeing the impact of his music on others brought a joy that words could not express. After the performance, the boy was approached by other young musicians and their parents, curious and inspired by what they had heard. Some asked questions about his practice, others simply offered words of encouragement. The boy responded politely, shyly, yet with a quiet confidence that came from having faced challenges and emerged stronger. He realized that talent alone was not enough. Courage, persistence, and authenticity were equally important. Music was not just a skill to be measured, but a bridge that connected hearts and told stories that could not be spoken. The judges deliberated, and when the results were announced, the boy did not care about the rankings. The recognition he received was meaningful, but it was secondary to the realization that he had truly expressed himself. He had faced a new stage, new eyes, and a new audience, and he had remained true to his music. That truth was more valuable than any award, more lasting than any applause. In the days that followed, the boy continued to practice, inspired by the experience. He sought new pieces to learn, new melodies to explore, and new ways to express himself. The competition had been a milestone, not a destination, and he understood that growth required patience, dedication, and love for the craft. His mother remained by his side, quietly supporting him. Proud of the boy he was becoming and the musician he was destined to be, the boy began to notice subtle changes in his world. People who had overlooked him now gave him attention. Teachers spoke of his discipline and focus. Neighbors asked him to play at small gatherings. None of this distracted him from his purpose. He remained dedicated to the music, knowing that true fulfillment came from the act of creation itself. From touching lives with the language of melody and emotion, evenings in their apartment became filled with longer, more complex compositions. The boy experimented with dynamics, phrasing, and expression. He played pieces that were challenging, pushing himself to master techniques that had seemed impossible before. And with each challenge, he discovered new aspects of himself: patience, resilience, creativity, and a deep, abiding joy that came from fully immersing himself in music. His mother, ever watchful, noticed the transformation. The boy was no longer simply learning. He was becoming an artist, someone who could communicate with the world through the beauty of sound. The community around them began to recognize the boy's gift. He was invited to small performances, workshops, and collaborations with other young musicians. Each opportunity was a chance to grow, to connect, and to refine his voice. He learned to balance humility with confidence, to listen as well as play, and to appreciate the journey as much as the destination. Through it all, the boy remained grounded, guided by the quiet wisdom and unwavering support of his mother. Together, they navigated the challenges and joys that came with nurturing talent, finding beauty in every moment and understanding that greatness was measured not by fame, but by the depth of heart and sincerity of expression. The boy's journey continued in ways he had not anticipated. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to learn and grow. He spent long hours practicing, refining his skills, and exploring music that stretched his understanding. Every note was an experiment, every melody a story to be told. He began to understand the nuances of expression, the power of silence, and the importance of feeling every phrase before playing it. The music became a mirror of his own life, reflecting struggles, triumphs, moments of quiet joy. His mother remained his constant anchor. She watched him, offering guidance when needed, but never imposing her own ideas. Her quiet encouragement helped him develop confidence in his own decisions, in his own interpretations of the music. They shared small moments together, tea in the evening while he hummed new melodies, walks through the neighborhood where he imagined new compositions inspired by the sights and sounds around him, an evening spent talking about dreams and aspirations that extended far beyond their modest apartment. As he grew more confident, the boy began to seek opportunities to perform for wider audiences. He played at community events, local gatherings, and small concerts, gradually building a reputation for both technical skill and emotional depth. People were drawn to the sincerity of his music, the way it seemed to speak directly to their hearts. He discovered that performance was not just about hitting the right notes. It was about connecting with others, sharing a part of himself, and listening to the responses of those who were moved by his art. The famous pianist, whose smirk had once seemed unshakable, began to take notice. Rumors of the boy's performances reached him through the grapevine. He attended one of the smaller events, curious and skeptical. Watching the boy play, he felt a mix of surprise and admiration. The boy's style was unique, authentic, and full of emotion. There was no pretense, no attempt to impress. It was music born from experience and heart. The pianist realized that talent and perseverance could appear in the most unexpected places, and that true artistry could not be taught, only discovered and nurtured in the boy's own life. He faced moments of doubt. There were times when he struggled with particularly challenging pieces, moments when he felt exhausted or unsure of his progress. But each obstacle was met with patience and persistence. He learned to break down complex compositions into manageable parts, to analyze each phrase, and to approach difficulties with curiosity rather than frustration. Over time, these experiences strengthened not only his skill, but also his character. He discovered resilience, determination, and the joy that comes from overcoming obstacles through effort and dedication. The community around him began to respond in unexpected ways. Local schools invited him to perform, neighbors asked him to play at gatherings, teachers sought his input for musical programs. The boy remained humble, focusing on the act of playing rather than recognition. Yet he could not ignore the impact he had on others. People spoke of how his music moved them, how it seemed to communicate feelings they had not been able to express themselves. This awareness deepened his understanding of the responsibility and power of music. One day, the boy was invited to perform at a regional music festival. It was a larger stage, with more experienced musicians, a bigger audience, and higher stakes. He felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The festival would be a chance to test himself, to see how far he had come, and to explore his abilities in a new environment. He practiced diligently, carefully selecting pieces that would showcase his strengths while also pushing him to grow. His mother supported him quietly, offering reassurance and small reminders to trust his own instincts. When the day of the festival arrived, the boy approached the piano with a calm determination. He remembered all the lessons he had learned: to breathe, to feel the music, and to let it flow naturally. The audience was larger, the atmosphere more intense, but he felt ready. As he began to play, the hall seemed to transform. The music filled every corner, carrying emotion, story, and presence. The audience listened, captivated by the depth and sincerity of the performance. Each phrase, each chord, was infused with years of practice, struggle, and love for the art. After his performance, the applause was overwhelming. The boy felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not from the recognition, but from the act of sharing something meaningful. The judges were impressed, not only by his technical skill, but by the emotional resonance of his playing. The experience reinforced his understanding that music was a medium for connection, a way to touch hearts and communicate without words. Following the festival, the boy continued to explore new directions in music. He began composing original pieces, experimenting with melodies and harmonies that reflected his own experiences and emotions. His compositions carried the same honesty and depth as his performances, and people began to recognize him not only as a talented performer, but as an emerging composer. He learned that music could evolve, that creativity was a lifelong journey, and that the heart of artistry lay in authenticity and dedication in the quiet moments at home. The boy and his mother reflected on the journey so far. They had faced challenges, doubts, and obstacles, yet they had also experienced growth, joy, and connection. The boy understood that success was not a destination but a path, shaped by effort, integrity, and the courage to pursue one's passion. Music had become a companion, a teacher, and a bridge to the world around him. Each day brought new lessons, new opportunities, and new ways to express the truths he carried within. Through it all, the bond between mother and son deepened. They had shared struggles, victories, and quiet moments of reflection. Their connection was a source of strength, a reminder that support, love, and understanding were as crucial as talent and practice. Together, they navigated the challenges of growth, the excitement of discovery, and the rewards of dedication, creating a foundation that would support the boy's journey. In music and in life, the boy's journey reached a pivotal moment as he prepared for a performance that could define the next stage of his musical path. Invitations had come from several venues, each offering opportunities to showcase his growing talent. But the boy approached each with quiet humility, mindful of the lessons he had learned, that music was not a tool for vanity, but a medium to touch hearts and express truth. He spent hours each day practicing, refining every phrase, listening deeply to the sound he produced and imagining the emotional journey of each note. Every chord became a story, every pause a conversation with the audience. His mother, ever present, watched him transform with a mixture of pride and wonder. She had witnessed the shy boy who once tapped on tabletops, to the young musician whose hands now moved with purpose and confidence. Her encouragement was quiet, but unwavering. She reminded him to rest, to eat, and to care for himself, knowing that his strength came not only from talent, but from balance and care. Together they navigated the complexities of growing skill, opportunity, and recognition, celebrating small victories and learning from challenges. The day of the performance arrived with a soft dawn, golden light spilling into the city streets. The boy felt a familiar flutter of nervous anticipation, yet it was tempered by the calm assurance born of experience and preparation. He recalled past performances, the supportive presence of his mother, the lessons learned from the grand hall, and the intimacy of smaller stages. Each memory anchored him, reinforcing his confidence in his own abilities. As he approached the piano in the performance hall, the audience's presence felt less intimidating and more like a shared space. Young musicians, seasoned listeners, and curious onlookers filled the room, eager to witness the music that had begun to ripple through the community. The boy took a deep breath, closed his eyes briefly, and let the memory of every practice session, every note played in quiet determination, guide his hands. The first note resonated, delicate yet full of intent, and the hall seemed to hush in response. Throughout the performance, the boy's music carried emotion in waves. There was technical precision, but more importantly, there was honesty, vulnerability, and connection. Each phrase told a story, each chord evoked memory, hope, or longing. The audience was captivated not merely by skill, but by the depth of feeling the narrative conveyed through melody. The boy became a conduit, channeling his experiences, dreams, and reflections into sound that spoke where words could not. The famous pianist, who had once smirked at his presence in the grand hall, sat quietly in the audience. Now he observed with genuine attention and respect. The boy's talent had grown beyond expectation, tempered with humility, dedication, and a remarkable ability to connect with listeners. The pianist's expression once amused, now reflected admiration and perhaps a touch of wonder at the journey he had. Glimpsed from a distance, after the final note lingered in the air, silence reigned for a moment, a collective breath, a pause that captured the weight of what had been shared. Then applause erupted, not perfunctory, but heartfelt, filling the hall with energy and acknowledgement. The boy opened his eyes, absorbing the response with a quiet, reflective smile. His mother, standing at the back, wiped a tear from her eye. Her heart swelling with pride and love. In the days that followed, opportunities expanded. Invitations came from larger venues, collaborations with other musicians, and requests to teach and inspire younger students. The boy embraced these experiences with humility, always focused on the essence of music, connection, expression, and truth. He composed original works, experimented with styles, and continued to perform with authenticity and care. Each performance, each new audience, became a new chapter in his journey, a continuation of the story that had begun so quietly in a hall filled with elegance and expectation. The boy's life had transformed, but the core of his existence remained simple and grounded. Home was still a place of warmth, routine, and shared quiet moments with his mother. Music remained both a passion and a companion, a path toward growth and understanding. The challenges he faced taught him resilience, the successes taught him gratitude, and the relationships he nurtured taught him the profound impact of empathy, encouragement, and shared joy ultimately. The boy learned that talent alone was fleeting unless paired with dedication, humility, and heart. He discovered that music was a lifelong journey, a way to touch lives and express truths beyond language. And through it all, he carried with him the lessons of every stage, every note, and every supportive glance from his mother, that greatness is not measured by fame or applause, but by the authenticity, effort, and courage one brings to every endeavor. The journey was far from over. But the boy had become more than a musician. He had become a storyteller, a connector, and a young man whose music resonated with honesty and humanity. The Hall of Opportunity had once seemed vast and intimidating. But now it was a place of possibility, where talent, dedication, and heart combined to create something timeless. The boy's story, begun with a simple note in a grand hall, continued to unfold, leaving a legacy not just in sound, but in the hearts of all who listened and believed in the power of music to transform lives. The boy's journey, though already remarkable, was only beginning to unfold in new and unexpected ways. After the last performance, life settled into a rhythm that balanced practice, growth, and exploration. Each day he rose with a sense of purpose, understanding that every hour spent with the piano was an opportunity to discover something new. He approached each composition with patience, examining melodies, harmonies, and rhythms, seeking not only technical perfection, but emotional resonance. Music had become a living, breathing part of his existence, reflecting the complexity of his experiences, the depth of his emotions, and the quiet strength that had carried him thus far at home. The boy and his mother maintained a shared routine that had become both grounding and nurturing. Breakfasts were quiet, conversations gentle, yet filled with meaning. The mother would watch him practice, sometimes softly humming along, other times offering small notes of advice or encouragement. Their bond, strengthened over years of shared struggle and triumph, remained a constant in a world of change. The boy knew that the support and love of his mother were as essential to his development as any practice or performance. She had taught him the value of perseverance, humility, and the courage to follow one's passion. The boy began to explore more challenging compositions, pieces that demanded not only skill, but interpretation and creativity. He experimented with phrasing, tempo, and dynamics, seeking ways to convey emotion through subtle shifts in tone. Music became a dialogue, a conversation with himself, and, by extension, with the audience. He understood that true artistry was not merely about playing notes correctly, but about telling a story, evoking feelings, and leaving an impression that lingered long after the final note faded. Performances continued to play a central role in his life. He was invited to local concerts, community events, and music workshops. Each setting offered new lessons and insights. From observing the reactions of audiences to collaborating with other musicians, the boy began to understand the nuances of stage presence, the importance of listening as much as performing, and the subtle ways in which music could influence mood and thought. His confidence grew not from fame or recognition, but from mastery of his craft and the satisfaction of connecting with others through sound. In parallel with public performances, the boy began composing his own music. These pieces were deeply personal, reflecting moments of joy, struggle, reflection, and hope. Composition demanded patience, creativity, and introspection. He spent hours experimenting with melodies, writing down notes, and refining each phrase until it captured the exact feeling he intended. This process became a form of self-expression, a way to document his journey, and a method to share emotions that were otherwise difficult to articulate. The boy also discovered the impact of teaching. Occasionally, younger students and peers asked for guidance or advice. He found that explaining techniques and concepts to others not only helped them, but also deepened his own understanding. Teaching required clarity, patience, and empathy, reinforcing the idea that music was a shared experience. Each interaction, whether a lesson or a casual conversation about sound, strengthened his sense of community and responsibility. He realized that artistry was not solitary. It thrived in the exchange of ideas and experiences. Challenges continued to appear. There were days when progress seemed slow, pieces seemed insurmountable, or nerves threatened to interfere with performances. Yet the boy had developed resilience through years of dedication. He approached setbacks with problem solving, analyzing mistakes, adjusting techniques, and persevering through frustration. Each difficulty became an opportunity for growth, reinforcing the principle that mastery was a journey, not a destination. The wider music community began to recognize his dedication and talent. Invitations arrived from more prominent venues and organizations, offering opportunities to perform for larger audiences and more discerning listeners. Each invitation was approached thoughtfully, considering the potential for learning and growth rather than immediate prestige. The boy understood that with opportunity came responsibility to remain authentic, to continue developing his skills, and to approach each stage with humility and respect for the art. Throughout all of this, the boy remained grounded by his mother's guidance and presence. She provided a steadying influence, reminding him that life was about balance, that well-being, relationships, and joy were as important as talent and recognition. Their shared moments, from quiet evenings of practice to walks through the city, reinforced the values that would guide him throughout life. Music, opportunity, and ambition were significant, but the foundation of love, support, and integrity remained the cornerstone of his journey. As the boy's skills and experiences grew, he began to envision a future not only as a performer but as a composer, teacher, and advocate for music. He understood that his journey could inspire others, that sharing his story and his music could create ripples far beyond the immediate audience. He explored new genres, experimented with instrumentation, and collaborated with fellow musicians, each endeavor broadening his understanding and challenging his creativity. Every project, performance, and composition reinforced the idea that artistry was a lifelong exploration, rich with learning, expression, and connection. Ultimately, the boy's life continued to evolve, shaped by dedication, love, and an unyielding passion for music. Each day was an opportunity to explore, create, and connect. The boy, once quiet and unnoticed, became a young artist whose music carried not only technical skill, but emotional depth, resilience, and authenticity. The story that had begun with a single note in a grand hall had expanded into a journey of growth, discovery, and inspiration, with countless chapters yet to be written. Music had become more than a path. It was a lens through which he experienced life, a means to touch hearts, and a reflection of the person he was becoming.